Grace and peace, beloved of God. Grace and peace. I'm going to try to tag some folks because we're running a tiny bit behind schedule because we're having some technical challenges here. But I do want to give you all time to get on here. Let me see who I can snag real quick. We pray that the Lord has continued to overshadow your life, and we trust that He has continued to meet every need because He's just faithful like that. We love Him with everything that lies on the inside of us, and so we're grateful for all that He has done. Just bear with me while I get some folk tagged in here so that they can know that we're live. We're excited about what the Lord is doing. Our topic, of course, we come on weekly, and our topic is domestic violence. And we're really committed to raising awareness about it. Expunging it from the entire planet would be amazing, especially in the church, because we are to be salt and we are to be light. And we cannot be salt and light if we are, in fact, indulging in the same things that the world is indulging in. So we're grateful to the Lord for really entrusting us with this mandate. There are many things that appear to be running amok in the earth at this point in time. But I want you all to know that the Lord is faithful. He is all powerful. There is no God like Him anywhere. Okay, so He's empowered us to address these things. And essentially what's happening is we're not addressing them. So, and I neglected to say, I'm Apostle Cheryl Richardson, and we are bringing another dimension, another broadcast of Shatter the Silence, Stop Domestic Violence. The topic on today is, I've left my abuser, but I'm a mess. I've left my abuser, but I am a mess. And we're going to talk about how the brain is impacted when we are subjected to trauma, when we are subjected to abuse. We want to put things in their perspective in terms of how we are failing, especially those of us who are in ministry and who are ministry leaders, how we are really failing. The church has fallen asleep at the wheel. We are snoozing, and we get messages like this, and we roll over and slap the snooze button and go right on back to sleep. And we tend to do that until it actually shows up at our house. And so the thing is, it doesn't have to show up at our house. And if it is at our house, it can be eradicated from our house. But we've got to do it in accordance with the Word of God. Just talking to folks not going to do it. Praying alone without action is not going to do it. It won't work. And so we should be able to tell that by just looking around. Just look around. Look around. So again, I am Apostle Cheryl Richardson. I've tagged a bunch of you. Please feel free to share. Those of you who follow me know that I'm not real good at saying share. At some point, it just kind of leaves my head and I'm completely focused on what I'm talking about. So please help a sister out. Share the video. If you're catching the replay, feel free to start a watch party. Whatever you can do to help us to spread awareness, share awareness. One of the things that I know helps is just to keep saying it, just keep repeating it. We as humans, typically, this has been scientifically established, we absorb nothing until we've heard it at least 3 times. That's why commercials repeat themselves so much. It's all a strategy. They know we don't catch it the first time. By the 3rd time, now you can lip sync the commercial, no matter what the product is. Even if you don't use the product, you know what the product is. You know the jingle that accompanies the product, right? So, we're going to just keep saying it and saying it and saying it. And honestly, the whole focus, what drives me is I'm going to just say it until you get tired of hearing it. And then maybe you'll do something, okay? Domestic violence is so prevalent. It's so prevalent that Um, Hi, everybody that came on while I was rambling. Hey, Misty. Hey, Kelly. Okay, I'm going to try to wave to y'all. I don't want to do too many things at one time. I was trying to make sure I got folks tagged. Hey, Jason. All right. So, domestic violence is a silent epidemic, even within the church. Okay. So, those of us who profess that we have a relationship with Christ, we are surrounded by people. Even when we attend our local assemblies and our places of worship, we are surrounded by folk who are either experiencing domestic violence currently or have a history of it. We're going to talk today about those of you who maybe had found yourself ensnared in a domestic violence relationship, but managed to garner the wherewithal to leave. And we've talked in the past about how difficult that is, that it's not an easy thing to do, and that it's fear-based, but the fear is based in reality. So it's not your imagination, the fear that you're experiencing about leaving, concerning all the things that could go wrong, because all of those things absolutely could go wrong. And every day we see stories in the paper where, in fact, it has. And oftentimes it leads to death, a homicide, murder, suicide, kidnappings, all kinds of craziness, right? So let's just say that you're ensnared in a domestic violence situation, because it is a snare and it is a trap. And most of the time, it's not something that you can typically walk out of easily. And this is why. It takes a while for the victim to get groomed to a place where they feel like they don't have any option but to submit to the abuse. And you go through this period of time where you think it's your fault. And if you don't burn the eggs, and if you do the laundry the proper way, and if you come home on time, and if you don't talk back, etc., etc., etc. Men, and this applies to men and women, because anyone can be a victim and anyone can be an abuser. But you go through this period of time where you feel like there's something that you can do yourself as an individual to prevent the abuse, to pacify the abuser, to calm them down, to make them more understanding, that you just need to be a better person to do it. Now, here's the tricky part. It takes time for all of this to happen, right? It takes a little bit of time. It takes the victim looking at the exit door and choosing not to utilize it repeatedly. And the longer you stay, the more difficult it is to stay. And the more difficult it is to understand that you are in danger and that you matter and that you're important, because of all the dynamics that accompany the abuse cycle in the first place, okay? So you go through all of that. And for some people, the abuse may start 2 or 3 months in. For some, it might be a year or so in. It's not going to start until the abuser is relatively certain that they've got you to a place where you are so open to them and you're so trusting, etc., that they've entrenched themselves enough in your life that it'd be easier for you to just kind of roll with it and stay in the relationship than to exit. So that time can vary. And a lot of that depends on the makeup of the victim, because they've been checking. If you're the victim, they've been checking you out. They've already assessed and determined about what it's going to take to get you under control and to get you to thinking the way they tell you to think. They really don't want you thinking for yourself too much, okay? So you go through all of that. And you go through the verbal abuse, and you go through the disrespect, and you go through being embarrassed in front of your friends. And eventually this all leads to isolation. Wherever it starts, it ends up with isolation, because you can only truly be controlled if you don't have any resources around you to tap into, right? So you deal with the isolation. And then maybe you tune into a Facebook Live like this one. Maybe you stumble onto domesticshelters.org, or you call the domestic violence hotline, or you cross paths with an advocate. You hear something that makes you think, maybe I do have value, and maybe I'm not supposed to be putting up with these shenanigans. This is dangerous. This is crazy. If you have children, my children are being affected by it. Their grades are dropping in school, or they're not going to sleep at night because they're afraid about what's going to happen to me. And you begin to count the costs, and you decide, I'm getting out of this, okay? Now, ideally, you have a safety plan. Every time I do a Facebook Live, I try to make sure I mention that, because it's dangerous not to have one. It's dangerous not to have one. You need a safety plan. You need a safety plan while you're in it and not quite ready to try to get out. You need it if you are in it and you just love him or her to pieces and you just can't imagine life without him. You still need a safety plan, okay? You need a safety plan if you're actually planning to leave. You need a safety plan. Hey, Cassie, you need a safety plan. If you're planning to leave, you need a safety plan once you're gone. Many victims get out, right? And it's amazing because you're out and you're trying to get your voice back and you're feeling empowered once again. And there may be a little bit of anxiety, but mostly you feel empowered because you outsmarted the abuser and you extricated yourself from a very negative situation. However, many victims don't have a plan after they get out. And that's very, very dangerous. That's very dangerous, especially if you're working the same place, attending church the same place, have the same friends and all of that. You need a safety plan. You need a plan that's going to address every place that you frequent. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to church, when you go to pay your water bill, the things that you have to do routinely, right? The things that you have to do. Hey, Tara, the things that you have to do routinely, you absolutely want a safety plan that's going to address how you conduct yourself. Hey, Bishop Green, love you. You want a safety plan that's going to address every place that you have to frequent. How do I exit this place if the abuser shows up? What do I do if they show up on my job? So you need a safety plan, okay? So although, I'm excited with you and rejoicing with you that you got out, I really need for you to remain safe and to be vigilant once you get out, okay? So again, today we're talking about, I've left my abuser, but I'm a mess. I left my abuser, but I am a mess, okay? And so many times, especially church folk, there's a tendency for us to get all ecstatic, right? And excited about victory, right? And glorifying God. And that's all well and good. But the Bible declares that we should count the cost. So there's a cost associated with staying within an abusive relationship. And there's absolutely a cost associated with leaving it. Okay? And so we need to stop over spiritualizing and sprinkling fairy dust on everything and understand that we have to be actively involved in our own deliverance. We have to be actively involved in our own deliverance. Right? When Paul and Silas prayed because they were in prison and the earthquake came and the cell door flew open, they still had to walk out. Right? Right? Angels didn't come by in an Uber and drive them away. They had to walk out or they would have still been in prison with the door wide open. So the same applies for us today. We have to be actively involved. We have to be accountable and assume responsibility for our own deliverance. And we have to assume responsibility for walking into it in the first place. All right? So the purpose of our lives is to help us to understand, number one, how we got into a situation. Number two, how to get out, utilizing wisdom so that you can be safe. Because our desire is that you live to fulfill the destiny that the Lord has assigned to you before the foundation of the world. That's at the bottom line. At the end of the day, we all, each and every one of us, myself included, need to be focused on what is the reason that I'm even occupying space on planet Earth. Why did the Lord allow me to be born? Why did he allow me to be born? There's a specific reason for that. And so when the enemy comes against you, it is to abort that. And he doesn't stop trying to abort it once you are born. And he doesn't stop trying to abort it once you pass your first test or your second test or your third test or your fourth test. He doesn't stop trying, okay? He's going to always try. And so we have to use wisdom. How do you do that? You do that by gaining knowledge, and you do it by implementing the knowledge, okay? So we know stuff, but we won't do anything with the stuff that we know. We know stuff. We know things, okay? Hosea, I'm going to say it. My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Semicolon, not a period, folks. Because thou hast rejected knowledge. So it's not the not knowing that keeps us ensnared. It's when we know, right? And we don't walk in what we know, that destruction finds us. And what I need for you to understand today, and this isn't even in my notes, You can be the apostle. You can be the bishop. You can be the minister of music. You can be the church mother. You can be the doorkeeper. And in an abusive situation, right? When the Lord makes information available to us, he causes it to find us. Most times we're not even really looking for it, and we need to be involved in our own deliverance. But he will ensure, because this is his character now, he will ensure that a way of escape exists, right? It's up to us to walk in it. It's up to us to walk in it. It's up to us to walk in it. When I found myself in a crazy situation, I will never forget this. I will never forget this. And I don't know if Bishop Anthony Hatcher, I don't know if he even remembers saying this to me. This was 20 something years ago, maybe longer. And he said this to me. He called me, he said, the Lord said that the only thing that you have to decide is between that situation and your destiny. I'm telling you, I could cry right now. I'm telling you, that was straight from the throne room. And that's the bottom line, beloved. That's the bottom line. That's your only decision. The only thing you have to decide. The real decision is not about, well, where am I going to live if I leave? And what's going to happen here? And what about my job? That's not the decision. What are you going to choose? Are you going to choose your destiny? The thing that Christ went to the cross for, to ensure that you could walk it out? Are you going to choose a situation that's killing you? I mean, it was, I don't even know how I responded, because I couldn't really even think of anything to say to that. It impacted me so that Christ died so that I could have freedom. What am I doing? What in the world? What am I doing? What am I doing? I'm not doing this anymore. Okay. And so that's the conclusion that I came to. And even then it's a process. So again, we're still talking about today. I left my abuser. So you have fought through all of that craziness, the gaslighting, the verbal abuse, the financial abuse, the stalking, the counting the miles on the odometer. I've been through all that foolishness. Okay. The miles on there, checking the phone, accusing you of liking folk that you don't even know. Somebody looked at you, so you must know them behind their back. This crazy stuff. All designed to make you think you crazy, okay? All right. So you plow through all of that, and you garner the inner strength to leave. Hopefully you had a safety plan. That's amazing if you did, okay? You get out, right? You get your place, or you stay with friends, you couch surf, whatever it is you have arranged to do, whatever it's been provided for you, you avail yourself of that. Maybe you're seeing a therapist. Maybe you're talking to the hotline on a regular basis and you have support that way. The people on your job are understanding. But you are a hot mess and you know it. People may be relieved because you got out. They might be excited and happy because you got out. But internally, you are jacked up and you know it. Just like everything else, humans have very short attention spans, right? So people are happy, yay, and encouraging you and, high five and keep going and don't give up. And then everybody slowly goes back to their life. And you're left with grieving the relationship. You're left with the words and the actions of the abuser still being lodged in your head. You are left with flashbacks, maybe. Insomnia, not being able to sleep. Having a horrible appetite, not eating at all. Or just eating junk. I'm just going to eat cake. I'm just going to eat ice cream. You're not taking care of yourself. You're not resting. You're not sleeping. You don't have peace. But now there's this expectation from the people around you that you're doing amazing, right? So you've got this front going on and yes, and I'm out and I'm strong and I'm powerful and I'm not going back and I'm not going back. This is what I've learned in a 30 plus year mental health career, okay? The louder a person says that, the more likely they are to go back to it. It's almost like they're trying to convince themselves by saying it repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. Okay? So the more you say it to me, the more I know there's an internal struggle going on. You're not really even talking to me, you're talking to you. So you've left. And that's supposed to be cause to celebrate, right? But you don't really feel all that celebratory after the first day or so. Because now what is happening is, we talked about the fact that you have hormones that are released in your brain. You can go back, search our Facebook Lives. We've talked about this a couple of lives ago. There are actually chemistry involved in this whole trauma situation that affect your brain. And they literally rewire how we respond to things. So for those of you who struggle with this and who have thoughts about even returning to the abuser, or I wonder how he's doing, or I heard that he or she is sick and I want to go by the hospital, and the Bible says to do good unto all men. So then we start misappropriating scripture, which is really dangerous, okay? The chemicals that are released in the brain, cortisol is one, and there are several others, actually cause the brain to kind of rewire itself and try to adapt to the pressure that is being subjected to, okay? So when you are in an abusive relationship, the goal becomes to get out, right? Once you understand that it's abusive and that you don't deserve it and that God does not require it, okay? And for some of us, it may have been, well, I don't know if he requires it or not, because church folk are telling me that I have to stay, but I'll take my chances. I have a conversation with God because I can't do this no more, okay? But once you leave, then the depression can kind of creep in, the longing, the craving, because abuse is an addictive thing. And so this is what happens, and hopefully this helps someone. You can get out, right? And you can have a strong support system. You can have people who love you and who are talking to you and saying, you are better than this, and we have confidence in you, and God has an amazing plan for your life. But what the victim craves is an explanation. The victim craves an explanation. They crave forgiveness. They crave acceptance from the abuser. And that's a chemically induced need. It's not about their character. It's not about if they're smart or not. It's not about if they have low self-esteem or not. Because all of those things factor in. If you have low self-esteem, it's a whole lot easier to convince you to do things that you normally wouldn't do because you don't have any respect for yourself, okay? But what I want you to understand is there are actual chemical releases in the brain that will cause you to crave to hear their voice, to not get rid of their things if they're the ones that left the home. Let's say they got arrested and so they're not in the home anymore. And you want to smell them. You want to smell them. We all have a scent, right? You want to smell them. You want to smell their cologne. You want to hear their voice. You want to feel them hold you again. All right? You crave it. And it's not a reflection on your character. I cannot emphasize that enough. So this should bring some relief, some measure of relief, because as hard as that is, as difficult as that is, the best way to beat it, right, is to stay away from it, just like any other addiction. If you're an alcoholic, you don't kick alcoholism by walking by the bar to see how it smells outside the door. Bars have this smell, especially the day after they've had a big old party. There's this aroma, this odor. You can't hang around that and stay clean. You can't hang around people that are still using and stay clean. You are lying to yourself. God did not send you into the bar to witness to nobody and you still craving alcohol yourself. The devil is a lie. Okay? What the enemy knows is if you find the internal strength and the fortitude to stay away, that you will break that thing. The hold on you will be broken. Now, it's not something that It's not, just like with substance abuse, it's not something that, okay, now I'm going to sit in the middle of everybody just getting high and smoking blunts and shooting up and it's not going to bother me. That's, first of all, why are you even doing that? Why do you need to do that? You're not proved, they're not paying any attention to you. You're not doing what they're doing. They could care less about you sitting there staring, okay? So what are you really doing? What is my point? My point is that as hard as it is, and it is hard, I can tell you from personal experience, it is hard. It's hard. It's a hard thing. There is nothing easy about it, especially if you have invested yourself. Now, let me tell you something. Abusers typically don't navigate the people who don't have anything, okay? Let me just share that. This whole idea that you don't have any value and you have nothing to offer and you all washed up and wouldn't nobody else want you is hogwash, because they wouldn't want you either if that was true. I'm going to just let that sit right there. If you didn't have anything going for you, they would not even have noticed you at all. If there's nothing for them to gain, why bother? These are lazy people. They are not about investing in anything. They're trying to gain control of something. So you have something. The fact that they're even interested means you have value, okay? No matter how you're feeling, the fact that they had interest in you means, this is what it means. They recognize the value that maybe you didn't recognize about yourself. They recognize something that you don't understand about yourself. And that's not good. That is not good. Hey, Apostle Owens, that's not good. They recognize something about you that you don't recognize about yourself. Okay? And it's not good in warfare for the enemy to know more about you than you know about you. You should know more about you than anybody. Your faults, your strengths, what you're good at, what you need to quit doing, you need to know that so that you can navigate warfare properly, whether it is natural or spiritual, all right? So, you get out and you think, I should be feeling amazing. Hey, Ashley, I should be feeling amazing because I did it. I got away from that craziness. I have a job. I'm gonna find out some resources. I'm gonna go see a counselor, and I am going to get myself together. But you are a hot mess on the inside. Here's the challenge that church folk face, and I'm sure all people face it, but I know church folk face it for real. There's an expectation that once you get delivered, that's a wrap. That's the end of it. Nothing else to talk about. Put it behind you. Keep moving forward. God's got great things for you. Listen, once we are wounded, healing has to occur. That's right, Cassie. And you've got to find your own value. And the truth of the matter is, you don't really believe you have value, or you would not have been submitted to abuse in the first place. You don't understand your true value, or that never would have been okay. You don't understand your true value because the first indication of it, you would have been out of there, because you would not have needed to explain it away. You would not have needed to make it okay. I call it the big lie. So anyone who's been ensnared in an abusive situation, or who is in one now, ask yourself this: what is the lie that I'm telling myself? What scripture am I misappropriating to make it okay for me to be called out of my name, for somebody to put their hands on me, lock me out the house, I don't know, try to run me over with their car? I mean, people experience some really crazy things. And what I'm saying is this: if a person who is healthy is not trying to walk through that, because they understand that God does not require it, and they're not feeling it. And so that's not going to happen. All right? When we need to make wrong right, now we're at odds with God. And this is where the problem comes in. I've had people say, well, why would God send that person into my life? He didn't. He didn't. He did not. And he knew that you had the wherewithal to recognize that it was a hot mess and walk away from it. And you chose not to walk away. That's what happened. Understand that there's always a conversation going on before the throne of grace concerning you. The enemy, Satan, is the accuser of the brethren. So he'll say, well, now, I bet if you she likes some tall and smelling good and driving a Cadillac. I bet if you let me send one of them, I bet she'll walk away from you then. That's the conversation that's taking place before the throne of grace. And God is saying, no, she won't. I know she loves me. I know he loves me. They might struggle a bit, but they'll make the right decision. Okay? They'll make the right decision. And so God has confidence in us. And then what do? Whatever our heart condition dictates. That's what we end up doing. Whatever we ultimately choose, beloved, no matter what we say, no matter what our title is, whatever we ultimately do is a direct reflection on our heart condition. Period. No exceptions. Doesn't matter if it's me. Doesn't matter what the title is, how educated we are, how great our lineage is, how amazing our grandmama was. Doesn't matter. What we ultimately do, not what we talk about doing. Not what we want folk to believe that we're going to do. Not even what we like to believe that we would do. What we ultimately do is a direct reflection of our heart condition. It's just that simple. Okay? And so when we avail ourselves of the information that God makes available to us, that is when we are truly empowered. Not when we have information offered to us and then we are dismissing it. Can't nobody tell us nothing. You can't tell me anything because you've known me my whole life and you're biased. Okay? You can't tell me anything because you don't know me well enough to tell me anything. Well, who does that leave? The people who know you can't tell you and the people who don't know you can't tell you either. So that means that there isn't anybody who can tell us anything. And that's another part of the problem. Okay? So, understand that when you leave, you're not going to always feel victorious. You're not going to always feel like celebrating. You may feel like that when you're around people who are supporting you and encouraging you, but at some point, it doesn't mean that you're a weak person. It doesn't mean that you're low functioning. It doesn't mean that you don't have a spine and that you don't love the Lord and that you don't love yourself. It doesn't mean that. It means that there are chemicals crashing around in your brain that are making it very difficult for you to understand what you ought to be feeling at this time. And anytime we are wounded, healing has to take place. You can go to the altar. They can lay hands on you. They can dunk you in a barrel of blessed oil. Okay? When you come out of the barrel, you're going to be oily and you're going to have work to do. And there'll be days when you feel victorious, and there will be days when you feel like giving up. There will be days when you feel like being around people. There will be days when you feel like it's just too much. It's all just too much. It's too much. And this is after you have left the abusive situation, okay? So it's important that our expectations are realistic. And we talked about this in a previous Facebook Live. When we have an expectation, if it's not reasonable, it will bite us. And it will cause us to go into a tailspin, to experience depression, to experience frustration unduly. Now, when I say reasonable, I'm not saying is it something that you should be able to expect. What I'm saying is, what is it reasonable to expect given what you were subjected to in that relationship? Is it reasonable to expect that you're going to leap tall buildings in a single bound? Days, weeks, months, sometimes even years, depending on the severity of the abuse. Is it likely? Is that reasonable? It's not reasonable. It's not reasonable. The reasonable expectation is that you just try to make progress every day, one step at a time, doing its self-introspection, seeking help from people who are skilled and who are able to help you to process it. Not being too hard on yourself in terms of what you respond to. Not beating yourself up because you miss the abuser and you want to smell his or her cologne or hear their voice, or I just want to drive by their house and see how they're doing. I just want to drive by their job. I just want to talk to my in-laws to see how he's doing. I don't want to talk to him or her directly, but I just want to find out how they're doing. Those chemicals are still crashing around inside your brain. Okay. And that's what's causing all of that. These emotions can occur even in a set of circumstances in which the abuser may be dead. There are times when people reach out to me and say, well, my abuser died in a car accident or died because they got sick or whatever. And I feel horrible and I feel guilty and I feel grief, and all of that's normal. So the abuser can literally die. Hey, Apostle Tanya, the abuser can literally die and you still be a hot mess. And you know that there's no real physical threat from them anymore because they've gone on to their just reward, whatever that is, right? But you still feel horrible because you still have these chemicals. Your brain has been rewired and affected by the trauma. And so the central point that I want to drive home today is that it's not a reflection of your character, of your self-respect, or anything. There are chemical reasons for it, okay? There are chemical reasons for it. So many times you experience enough trauma, you experience PTSD. I know I've got several friends on here that are therapists, so they know what I'm talking about. Post-traumatic stress disorder, which brings with it a whole laundry list of symptoms that affect your ability to function in your day-to-day life. And it can be absolutely debilitating, okay? And all of that is in response to the brain being rewired, to these chemicals crashing around, running amok, okay? These things have become dysregulated due to the stress that a victim is under on an ongoing basis. Because when you look at abuse, it occurs in a cycle always, okay? So it occurs in a cycle. So you're either in a position where you are actively receiving abuse or you are gearing up and anticipating the abuse to come back around because you know it always does, okay? And so that's ongoing stress. So when physical assault is happening, when it's not happening, when verbal abuse is occurring, when it's not occurring, when a financial abuse is occurring, when it's not occurring, you've got these chemicals being released in an attempt to get your body prepared for fight or flight. And it's a constant thing. There's no relief from it because you're trapped in this cycle and there's no relief from the cycle. Okay. And so that happens. And when you have PTSD, when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, here are some of the symptoms. Here are some of the things that accompany it. And many people have most of them. Okay. Nightmares, increased anxiety, insomnia, low frustration tolerance. What does that mean? The things that you normally could tolerate just take you over the edge. You just cannot. You can't. You cannot. The kids are playing and that's too loud. The TV's on and that's too loud. A car drove by and it's too loud. I mean, you just cannot. The things that normally you would be able to be maybe a little annoyed by, but you'd be able to dismiss it and regain some sense of equilibrium. These things send you over the edge, okay? And you recognize that you're overreacting to things. You become very risk averse regarding relationships, which means you don't trust anybody. You don't trust anybody at all. Period. No exceptions. You're looking at everybody sideways, okay? And that's stressful, okay? Fear of more abuse, abandonment, or loss of autonomy causes many to go to the other extreme. So there's a tendency, this is what we do when we get hurt anyway. And church folk are notorious for that because, we can be very rigid in our belief system. We go from one extreme to the other. And God is a God of balance. So anything too far to the right or too far from the left has left him out altogether. God is a God of balance. Health involves a balance, even in our physical bodies. Mental health involves a balance, right? And so there's a tendency to go from being codependent and all entwined in the abuser to being counterdependent, where I don't need anybody and I'm going to do this thing by myself and I'm not dependent on nobody and I don't trust anybody. Well, anytime we apply anything to everybody, we've already missed the mark because it's not accurate. It's completely inaccurate because we're all individuals, okay? And I submit to you that God would not allow you to go through life without a single person in your life that you can trust. There's somebody, and it may be somebody that you've been dismissing because they didn't meet your expectations somehow. Okay? So, what else do I want you to know? Okay. Because of that, though, because we can become risk averse, there's a couple of things that can happen. we can be drawn to what's familiar, which is another abusive individual, okay? Or we settle because we tell ourselves our expectation is too high. Hey, Georgia, we tell ourselves that our expectation is too high, so then we settle. And here's where the scripture comes in. Well, this time I don't need anybody that's saved. Whatever that is. I don't need anybody that's like a powerhouse in church or the apostle or the church mother or anything like that. If they believe in God, that's okay. As long as they don't hit me, it's okay. They don't have to be a doctor. They don't have to be a lawyer or anything. They don't have to be an astronaut. It doesn't matter what people do for a living. As long as they don't hit me. Well, I'm not attracted to people that are built that way. But they seem nice enough. We will settle for a whole lot less than what we're even interested in, which just sets the stage for some more shenanigans. We'll commit to things. We'll commit to circumstances. We will commit to individuals that we are not even attracted to at all. Okay? I have a question. How's that supposed to work over time? So then you end up in another mess because you shouldn't have gotten into that one in the first place. No matter how long ago your experience with abuse has occurred, if you have not sat down with someone and really processed your situation with someone that is skilled at processing it, you are making decisions in your present day relationships, and it doesn't matter how long it's been, beloved. If you be honest, if you look back over your life, you've made decisions since you left the abuser, since that situation ended, that were not good choices because you've not addressed the wounds that you carry with you day to day. You've got chemicals crashing around in your brain. Everything's dysregulated. The yardstick that you're using to measure life and to determine who's safe to be with and who's not safe to be with is completely jacked up. And an example that I would give my patients sometimes is this. If you have a yardstick and it's supposed to be 1 yard, but it's not really a full yard, it's 3/4 of a yard. It doesn't matter how many times you measure a thing, you're going to come up with the wrong thing. It doesn't matter if you put it down and walk away from it, right? And come back later when you calm down. It doesn't matter if you turn it inside out. It doesn't matter if you flip it to the other side. The thing that you're using to make the measurement is inaccurate. You will never get a proper measurement using that particular yardstick. Now, can you trade your yardstick in? In a case like this, no. Okay? But what you can do is learn how deficient is your yardstick. And you can do this with help. How deficient is your yardstick? Where is your blind spot? What is it that you tend to do repeatedly? What lie is it that you tell yourself that empowers the abuser, right? If you don't take the time to identify those things, and don't go hiding in scripture, don't do that. Do the work. Identify how you got there for real. What was appealing about it? What need did you think was being met when you made that decision that turned out to be not such a good decision? Okay? If you can identify that, you don't need a new yardstick. You just need to do the calculation. I know I tend to make excuses when it comes to X, Y, and Z. So when I hear myself doing that, I know I'm lying to myself. Tell your friends, if you hear me say, but you know, they were dropped on their head at birth, it's not their fault. Check me, because that's what I say to myself when I'm setting myself up to get in a mess, okay? That's what I'm telling you. So there's hope. You don't have to excavate and destroy and tear up everything on the inside of you. But you do need to be able to identify what made you vulnerable in the first place. What made it more appealing than obeying God or doing it God's way? What made it more appealing than ending that situation at the very first sign? What was the first sign? I challenge you that when you identify what you think was the very first indication that that situation was abusive, that wasn't even the first one. I challenge you to think a little bit harder, and then think again, and then think again. Because it's when we can identify the root of a thing, then we can be free. And then we can not go there again. And then we can help other people not to go there too. And if they do, we can help them to get out. Okay? I promised God something years ago. And I promised the enemy something years ago too. And this is what I told him. You almost got me. You almost got me. And if you had gotten me, it would have been my fault. Looking back. Okay? This is what I told him. Every single time you come against me, and I know you coming, but every time you come, I'm going to turn it into a workshop or a seminar or a sermon or something. And I'm going to teach everybody that I can. Number one, how not to go there in the first place. And number two, how to exit safely if they've managed to get in a jam. I meant that. I'm committed to that. Okay? I'm committed to that. And so when he comes for me, I talk to y'all. There you go. Okay, it's not going to be for nothing. And I'm saying to you that it doesn't have to be for nothing in your life. God did not have any intention of you being abused or mistreated. God did not send that person. I don't care who told you God sent them. God did not do that because God did not need to do that. He does not want to see us hurt. He does not want to see us wounded. What he wants, though, is for us to understand the condition of our own heart, to understand what's truly most important to us in that season in our life, okay? If not being alone is the most important thing, you'll gravitate to anything or anybody that's saying what you want to hear in that moment. And then you'll make excuses to stay when it starts to become evident that maybe this is not what I thought that it was, okay? We have to know what's on the inside of us. What did I say at the very beginning? You don't want the enemy to know more about you, to acknowledge more about you than you do, right? That's not wise. Okay, so our brains are very, very complex, okay? And what happens is these chemicals get released in an ongoing basis because we're under this tremendous amount of stress. If we're not being physically abused or verbally assaulted or whatever, then there's the buildup to it. Then there's a chemical that's released when the abuser calms down and brings the flowers or the jewelry or the card, or says, well, let's take a vacation, or let's move across country where we don't know anybody and we can just start over. And that sounds appealing, right? Because maybe his family or her family is interfering. So that sounds great. And it's what you always wanted. It's what you've always asked for. And they've always refused to give you in an attempt to control you. So now they offer it in an attempt to control you. Okay? And a chemical is released in the brain when that happens. A chemical is released in the brain when that occurs. So you've got chemicals being released when you're under stress and being actually abused. And then you have chemicals that are released that counter all of that anxiety when you appear to have the approval of the abuser. And that's where that addiction kicks in, where you need to hear their voice. You want to smell their clothes. You want to hear hear them say that they love you, that they care about you, that nobody, it's just you and them against the world, okay? And so all of this is still going on in your brain when you pack your stuff and leave. It's still going on in your brain when you throw them out. It's still crashing around in your brain. And everything is dysregulated. And the thing that you have to understand is that you can't trust your judgment at this time. I'm going to just say that. You can't trust your own judgment. You got too many variables that you don't have any control over now that are dictating what you do and what you don't do. And this is why it's important that you connect with an advocate or a therapist or someone who is skilled and who is not going to tell you that you need to stay and who is not going to beat you over the head. Well, you need to forgive, okay? Because forgiveness does not mean reconciliation, okay? And as we stated in a previous Facebook Live, you can't forgive anybody completely when they first injure you because you don't even have a full and complete understanding of what they have cost you in the first place. So you can only forgive them for what you are aware of. And in an abuse situation, I'm telling you, you're going to get down the road a year or 2 or 3 and realize that they cost you something that you hadn't even considered when you first left that situation. Okay, so it's important who you trust, and it's important that you understand that you can't listen to you. I have a dear friend, right, who is struggling with addiction, And she's been sober for some time, and then she relapsed. And my advice always to her is, don't listen to you. You're the last person in the world you need to listen to right now. You cannot trust your own advice right now. Okay? And so understand when you come out of an abusive situation that you can't trust your judgment. It doesn't mean that you won't get to a place where you can again, but you need to get to a place of safety. Someone who's designated a safe place. Someone who is skilled, who can connect you to resources, who's not going to make you feel worse than what you already feel. Okay? Now, I'm not saying connect with someone who's going to just tell you what you want to hear, because that's dangerous too. Every once in a while, they should say something that stings a little bit. It's like, oh, okay. Oh, okay. When people come to me and they're teetering on the edge of going back, or say, oh, well, I have his belongings, and I want to take him to his sister's house. That's where he's staying. I said, what are you doing? Why do you need to take the clothes to his sister's house where he's staying? Did you hear what you just said? Okay. So when I say connect to someone who can help you and who's not going to hurt you, I'm not saying connect to somebody who's going to just say what you want to hear or let you run amok and not bring it to your attention. If you care about people, tell them the truth. Speak the truth in love, but speak the truth, okay? Because honestly, from a spiritual perspective, we're going to be required, church folk, for sure, to give an account for this horrible advice that we've been giving folk. We're going to have to answer to God for that, because it's not okay. All right. It's not okay. Especially if we're advising out of our own fear. Okay. So when trauma occurs in an ongoing manner, the hormone cortisol is released and can exist in abundance in the brain. It can activate the amygdala. I always have problems pronouncing that. Which is the area in the brain that's responsible for emotions and emotional behavior and our motivation. And the stress of that causes even more cortisol to be released. Now, cortisol has effect on us. You may have heard about it in terms of retaining weight. It can cause your blood pressure to elevate and to stay elevated. So there are lots of things that are happening physically that affect the decisions that we make. And I think it's important that we understand what those are. Hey, Ruth Anna. All right. So the people, that part of the brain, in people who have been traumatized is overly sensitive, right? And so this is what it looks like. Hypervigilance, we call it in counseling. Oversensitive to stimuli. Over alert. Extra alert. And this is a classic symptom of PTSD. It's like their radar is up and running all of the time. A person who is struggling with this may come across as aggressive. They may come across as angry. They may be overly sensitive to threats or something that they perceive to be a threat because they've been under so much pressure. Okay. Or they could be the reverse, and they could be very, very withdrawn and isolative. Okay. Keeping to themselves, completely uncomfortable around other people. Okay. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle, and it leaves the victim with a heightened sympathetic arousal, fight or flight response. So they are in fight or flight mode all of the time. There are certain things that people who have experienced trauma, it can be from combat, it can be from domestic violence, which is kind of familial combat. That's combat within the home, within your own space that is supposed to be safe. There are things that kind of follow them. When I think about my own life, I grew up in the inner city of Philadelphia. And all of my best friends when I was growing up were gang members. And they were like brothers. It was like having like 20 brothers, really. And I have a brother that I love dearly. But he was in Vietnam and I was little. And then he lived in another state. So he wasn't around. So I had like 20 other brothers. And they were all gang members. And so, of course, there's a degree of violence that surrounds them all the time. And so from a very early age, I was always aware that they could go and get into a fight and all of them probably weren't going to come back, or they were going to come back wounded or injured severely or whatever, right? And so that was part of my childhood. And then also growing up as a child, I experienced domestic violence. I observed it in my home, what my mother went through. And then I joined the military. And there are things that you learn in there about maintaining your own safety or whatever. And I was in there for 16 and a half years. I was enlisted for 8 years, and then I was an officer for 8.5 years. There are things even today, and people who know me, right? My patients tease me about this. I will not sit with my back to a door today. I will not. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm going to see everything that's going on in this room, period. And I'm not having a bad day. I'm having a fantastic day, but I'm still going to see. When I walk in, it's a habit for me to know where exits are. I do it automatically. It's not something I stop and think about. I know where the exits are and all of that. So there are things that follow you that don't have to necessarily be detrimental. And in this day and age where you have all this craziness going on with mass shootings or whatever, it's not a bad idea to be a little bit more vigilant. But when we're talking about PTSD, we're talking about it's debilitating. It interferes with a person's ability to enjoy life, to even fully engage in life, because they are so focused on ensuring their own personal safety, okay? The effects of trauma are cumulative and can cause the victim to be in a state of hypervigilance or hyperarousal or overreaction, or hypoarousal is when they withdraw or shut down, which is what I just explained to you. The increased cortisol alerts the brain to threats that may not even be real. So, what does this look like? You left the abuser, right? You've left the abuser, and maybe they used to yell at you or curse at you, get to a certain edge in their voice. And so now you're at work and someone says something to you. Let's say you work in customer service and an angry patron approaches the customer service desk. There's an automatic response to that, and there's a defensive mode or a withdrawal and retreat mode that you may find yourself in, and it has more to do with what you've experienced in the past than what's being presented. So what can happen is anything that remotely resembles what the abuser did gets an overreaction. Now we have to be careful here, because I'm certainly not saying ignore it, okay? I'm not saying ignore, but take a moment to examine, is this what I think it is? There's a tendency to just react, okay? And you stand ready to be defensive all the time. And that means that you like peace, right? And so we need peace. We need the peace of God in order to navigate our lives coming out of an abusive situation, okay? Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself through new connections and brain growth. And so that's what happens. All of that stress happens. All these chemicals are running amok. There's too much of them being released in our brain and into our system. And our brain rewires itself to accommodate all this excess hormonal activity. Okay? The only way that we can feel better is to befriend what is going on inside of ourselves in terms of emotional regulation. So, here is something that I didn't get from a book. This is something that God gave me in my quiet time with Him when I was walking this thing out for myself. That it's important what we tell ourselves about a situation. The reality of it is, most humans check out 3 or 4 minutes into your conversation. They're not paying attention. They ask you, how are you doing? If you ask them 10 minutes later how they responded, how you responded, they probably couldn't even tell you, because they weren't even listening, okay? Who we listen to is ourselves. We listen to ourselves. And so we tell ourselves how to respond to whatever we perceive just happened to us. And embedded in that self-talk is what we believe the motivation was for the offending action in the first place, okay? If someone does something and we really believe going into it that this is someone who loves me, that I trust, who would never do anything to damage me or to harm me in any way, if they say something and it hits us kind of sideways, what we tell ourselves is, I don't like the way that sounded, but I don't think they meant that like that. They're just looking out for me. And we respond accordingly. But if we are told that same thing by someone that we don't have that relationship with, or that we don't trust their motivation, or they remind us of the abuser, they look like him or her, smell like him or her, have mannerisms like him or her, there's a completely different internal response. And if we tell ourselves, well, who do they think they talking to? And I'm not going through that again. And nobody else is going to treat me like that. The response is completely different than in scenario number one. Okay. So it's really all about what we tell ourselves about what just occurred. It's important. So how do you combat this? This is what I've done in my own life. If you can identify catchphrases, the shorter the better, because like I said, the shorter the better. Because once your fuse gets lit, it's lit, okay? And what you don't want is an explosion. Short catchphrases that you can say to yourself that will help you to remain regulated and in control. This is what I say to myself. Literally. You don't have to respond to that right now. You don't have to respond to that right now. If you ever hear me say it aloud, it's like I need to hear it, not just think it. I need to hear myself say, you don't have to respond to that right now. And it helps because it doesn't strip me of the power to respond at all ever, okay? If I were to tell myself, well, you don't have to respond to that ever. My fuse has already been lit. I'm not buying that argument at that point. That's an ineffective argument once the fuse is lit in my life. I'm just talking about my fuse, okay? So I have to tell myself something is reasonable. You don't have to respond right now. And embedded in that statement is the understanding. I have the understanding that I can clown later if I decide that clowning is what I actually want to do, okay? 99% of the time, it's not going to be worth it once you calm down. So I tell myself, you don't have to respond to that right now. And I cannot tell you how many times in my life that has worked. For me and for the opposing party who didn't even know why I was saying it, okay? You don't have to respond to that right now. You can use a scripture. I have the mind of Christ. I have the mind of Christ. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. You can tell yourself there are more with me than against me. You can tell yourself that you've got to have something to reach for, right? When you're attacked in that way from an emotional standpoint, because you don't want to just rely on your emotions. All right. So restoring proper balance is the key to resolving trauma. Trauma throws everything off kilter, including the chemicals in your brain, and it forces your brain to kind of rewire itself. And you've got to train it back the other way, and you've got to get a handle on that. You need help doing it. And this is why I say it's important that you connect with someone who is skilled in doing this. Not just someone who loves you and thinks you're amazing, because they're going to hit a point where they can't help you. And then they'll rely on old wives' tales or what their mama told them or whatever, okay? And this is about you regaining a quality of life that is healthy, okay? What else? Anxiety. When we become reactive and disorganized, our filters stop working. So when we get upset, let's just say that we're triggered. We can use that same scenario. Maybe a customer approaches you and they are rude and obnoxious, and so was your abuser, so was your ex or whatever. In that, I'm not going to put up with this anymore mode, you explode back. You're going to probably lose your job because that's completely inappropriate in the workplace, correct? They're not going to want to hear about your history and about how you've been traumatized. What they care about is a customer came into a place of business, they said something rude, and you flipped out. Okay? So it can cost us when we don't learn how to gain control over our faculties after we've been through an abusive situation. The other thing is you can't withdraw from everything. You cannot withdraw from everything. It almost invites obnoxious behavior when we do. When we present as timid and unsure of ourselves, then it invites a whole nother series of challenges, okay? It's important that you are aware of your triggers. It might be someone raising their voice. It could be a certain cologne. It could be a certain cologne. It could be music. It could be surroundings, memories, holidays. It's important that you identify what your triggers are. It could be something that the abuser has always done, or keywords that they always said, things that they always did that would trigger you. So someone else saying it would cause that heightened overreaction all over again. So it's important that you identify them so that you can minimize your contact with those triggers. And then maybe over time, raise your ability, increase your ability to be around them without having a negative effect on you. So remember that your self-talk is critically important. It matters what you tell yourself once you do feel triggered, once you do feel out of, like you're losing control, okay? So you want to cultivate compassion, and this is important. Compassion for others, but especially compassion for yourself. I tell the people that I minister to that you are at least as important as the people around you. You are at least as important as the abuser. You are at least as important as your children. You are at least as important as those people that you hold in high esteem and who you would never think about hurting. You are not any less important than they are. Therefore, you deserve the same compassion that you extend to them, the same understanding that you extend to them. Okay? Viktor Frankl, who was a psychologist, stated, "Our freedom is in the pause between the stimulus and the response." Our freedom is in the pause between the stimulus and the response. And so once you've been through an abusive situation, you will find that there are certain things that you respond to on an emotional, visceral level. And what he's saying is the freedom is in that space of time between the triggering event and how we choose to respond to it. That's where we have control. We have control over how we respond. We can't control how people, what they launch at us, right? We can't control, to a very large degree, what challenges we will face. But we can control how we choose to respond to it, okay? So severe emotional trauma causes lasting changes in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex region of the brain. And this section regulates our emotional responses. Specifically, it regulates negative emotions, such as fear. Okay, so keep that in mind. And according to the National Institutes of Health, traumatic stress has been associated with cortisol and norepinephrine responses to stressors. 8% of Americans are affected by PTSD at some point in their life. And we've already talked about what PTSD entails. It also affects our ability to concentrate, our ability to make decisions, our ability to focus. Okay? And we're almost done. Let's talk about norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is a hormone that mobilizes the brain and the body to action if secreted in response to stress. It increases blood pressure, which I already shared. It increases heart rate. It increases the glucose. You can really develop type 2 diabetes from being under ongoing stressors, from having these hormones being released all the time. Okay? And it underlies the fight or flight response, which we already talked about. It increases water retention. It increases thirst, okay, because it constricts our blood vessels. Then cortisol is the other hormone. Prolonged cortisol elevations cause elevation of blood sugar, loss of calcium from the bones, loss of muscle mass, increased fat accumulation, loss of cognitive function. The symptoms of elevated cortisol are high blood pressure, a flushed face, muscle weakness, thirst, and urinating more frequently. So being under stressful conditions affects us. It affects us physically, it affects us emotionally. It is debilitating spiritually. It's important to understand that God doesn't require it. What I find disturbing as an apostle And just even looking back over my life, I am mortified when I think about the horrible advice. Horrible. I'm telling you, horrific advice that I have gotten from people who I should have been able to trust. Who, for their own reasons, and I don't think they were intentionally trying to give me horrible advice, but I think that they were responding to my issues through their own fear and not addressing their own fears. And it's important that we don't counsel people. Those of us who are in ministry leader positions, it's important that we don't counsel people out of our fear and out of our brokenness and out of our need to feel like we're helping somebody else. It's okay to go sit down. It's okay to say, you know what? I can't help you right now because I got to get myself together. It's okay. It's okay. The Bible tells us that with every temptation, right? Not every other one, not some of them, and not the rest of them. With every temptation that we will ever experience, that God has guaranteed us a way of escape. All of them. Temptation, beloved, is not just about fornication. It's not just about smoking crack. It's not about just, abusing fentanyl. It's not about alcohol. It's not about shoplifting and gambling and all these things that we identify as sin. We are in sin anytime we try to do things in a manner that we think is best. When we don't consult the Lord, when we don't rightfully apply His word, when we don't rightfully divide it and apply it, we're just doing what we want to do. And we're trying to use scripture to justify it. So no matter what situation we find ourselves in, and this has helped me immensely. Whatever situation we find ourselves in, there is a way out. I promise you, there's a way out. If you think you're in a situation and you can't get out, inbox me. I guarantee you we will find a way for you to get out. Because there is a way out. God promises us that. You are not trapped to your detriment unless you choose not to avail yourself of the information that He is promised to get to you. Okay? Now, you don't know that you're going to have 10 warnings in your abuse situation. What you're promised is a way of escape. God may not send 10 people 20 different times to tell us the same thing, but He's going to send somebody. You're going to come across the information somehow. And if you're watching this Facebook Live right now, this may be the only opportunity you have. Okay? But it's an opportunity for you to get free if you want to be free. We are wrong when we blame God because an abuse victim is murdered or doesn't get out. I believe that information was presented to them and they chose to stay because they had not adequately identified how they lied to themselves to keep themselves stuck. And so the longer you stay in it, the more difficult it is to get out of it. There are people who stay married for 20 and 30 years. And the church is like, yay, happy anniversary. And they've been trapped in the belly of hell since year one. That's not God. And for those who say God hates divorce, Malachi chapter 2, verse 19 makes it clear. And the only time you hear anybody talk about Malachi is when they want a tithe and offering, okay? Malachi, the second chapter, talks extensively about abuse and how God is tired of it and how God doesn't like it. He hates it. And He hates divorce, but the Bible also says that the person, the individual who is abusing their partner does not have the Spirit of God. Not one iota. There is none of the Spirit of God living on the inside of them. They can be an apostle. They can be a bishop. They can be the church mother. They can be the chief apostle, the archbishop. They can be a doctor. They can be a lawyer. They can be a sanitation worker. They can be a janitor. It doesn't matter. If they are abusing their partner, they do not have the Spirit of God in them. I don't care if they just went to the pulpit and preached fire, because God's going to honor His word. The fact that a message is powerful, the fact that people get saved and delivered and set free does not mean that that person is walking right with God. That means that God honors the people who assemble together to hear from Him. He's making sure they get what they need. And he'll deliver that through whoever is available. Okay? So we got this thing confused. We make certain assumptions based on titles and what we think accomplishments and all of that. If you are abusing, if someone is abusing you, the Spirit of God does not reside on the inside of them. And therefore, you are submitted to who? Who are you submitted to? Who are you submitted to? If they're not living for God, if he's not living on the inside of them, you are submitting to your enemy. I think that's a good note to end this on. What y'all think? We appreciate you all. We are committed. We are committed to doing this because there's so much time is being lost and wasted out of people's lives. People are dying all of the time because they're not being given good advice. And because when God sends advice, they dismiss it. And so I submit to you that the church has fallen asleep at the wheel. I submit to you that the silence is deafening. I submit to you that 90% of people say they've never even heard a sermon across the pulpit. I'm not talking about on Tuesday night when 10 people come to Bible study. We have weeks that we'll do discourses about 10 ways to buy a house and 5 steps to financial freedom and all of that. But we won't talk about domestic violence. We won't talk about child sexual assault. We won't talk about human trafficking. And these are things that are headed up by ministry leaders in many cases. That's a whole nother Facebook Live. Okay? We love you. We covet your prayers. We put the information for sewing if you're interested in sewing. No pressure because we fully believe God tells us to do stuff. I just expect him to provide a way to do it. I'm open to however he provides. Fine with me. But this is absolutely good soil to sow into. So we put our information, our Cash App information, and our PayPal information at the very, very top of the notice that we were going live, so you can find it there. Also, we've established a couple of months ago a closed Facebook group called Dominion Over Domestic Violence. We encourage ministry leaders to join so you can stop pretending that you're okay when you're not okay. Those of you who are okay, feel free to join so that you can offer support and encouragement to those who are still ensnared in various stages of an abusive situation. Some of you may come that you join, right, in order to lend support and find that you need support, and that's okay too, because that's what we are here for, okay? It's not, if it involves fake smiling and fake hallelujah and fake speaking in tongues, I'm not interested. So we want people to get delivered and set free for real, for real, for real, so that you can live your best life, okay? So that you can live that abundant life that Christ died for. He died to ensure it's already secured for us. We are not availing ourselves of it because of the lies that we're telling to ourselves and because we're letting one another down, okay? 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men are victims or have been victims of domestic violence. This is an epidemic worldwide. We covered your prayers. We're starting to get invites now to go to other nations, to physically visit other nations, to talk about this and to educate people, because this is a problem worldwide. So we covered your prayers. We anticipate we'll start traveling soon. And as we've stated to you previously, we're going to put together a program that we can bring to your local congregation to educate your ministry leaders so that they know how to help the people in your congregation. We have got to get ahead of this thing. We've got to get ahead of it. Amen. So pray for us. Know that we will continue to pray for you. Share this Facebook Live. Visit our personal page, Cheryl Richardson. I have another page, Apostle Cheryl L. Richardson. And then our ministry page, Lion of Judah Global Impact Ministries. Visit our pages, like, share this information so that people's lives can be saved. Amen. We love you. God bless you. And know that you can inbox me if you need to. Okay. We appreciate you. Blessings. We'll be back on next week. See you then.